still very young in my ministry, and I had an invitation to go to the University of Illinois and speak to almost 20,000 college students. And they wanted me to challenge them to answer the call to full-time Christian service. And I was so excited about the invitation, and it was bigger than anything I'd ever done and more grand than anything I'd ever done. And so I worked real hard on the sermon, and I'll have to tell you, I developed a phenomenal sermon. I mean, it was really good. And I polished it and kept polishing it. And finally the day came, went to Urbana. Literally the day afternoon before I was supposed to speak to this huge crowd of kids and talk to them about full-time service, God spoke to me. Well, I'm just working on that sermon, getting it ready, and I can hardly wait. God said, John, by the way, I don't want you to preach that message. Now, this was a stinking stable. What do you mean, God? I want to show up without you. All I want you to do is go out on stage and look at those kids and say, I know God's already been talking to you in this 2-day conference, and you're ready to answer the call, and if you want to go into full-time ministry, I want you to come forward and put your ID cards on the stage. He said, really, that's all I want you to do? And I said, oh, God. You don't understand. You don't understand. Have you taken time to look at this message? God. Awesome. Yeah, I've looked at it, John. I don't need it. Don't need you. Just do what I say. Now, I would like to tell you that I said, oh, thy servant heareth. But this servant heardeth, but didn't doeth. And I can still remember walking out on stage, almost 20,000 kids, and trying to preach a message that God asked me not to preach. It was the most devastating, humbling, horrible experience of my communication life. For 3 minutes, I stammered and got up there and tried to say things, and they weren't coming out right. Finally, I just looked at the kids and said, you're seeing a living example of disobedience to God. He didn't want me to preach this message, but I wanted to preach this message. He wanted to receive glory, but I wanted to receive glory. And you're going to have to forgive me. And I'm going to tell you now what God said to me. And I shared with those kids what God said to me. And they began to break out in applause. They began to weep. They began to come forward. 2,300 students answered the call to full-time Christian ministry that night. Everywhere I travel, there is not a month in my life that goes by I don't have somebody look at me and say, I was at Urbana. And I came forward and answered the call to preach that night. Thank God they never called me Jonah. But that experience literally changed my life. Do not miss this. The stable experiences in your life are good for all of us because God is in the stable. When you go into the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 15, it's so interesting. There's a phrase that opens up that chapter. It says, after these things. Now, God has been, in the last 3-4 chapters, has been taking Abraham on this incredible journey to be the father of nations. And he's taking him on this incredible, and it says after these things. And so when you open up chapter 15 of Genesis, after these things, you've got to say, well, I got to go back to see what these things are. And after these things, after what things? After Abraham had lied about Sarah, saying that he was his sister instead of his wife, after there was a famine, after he had family troubles and problems and squabbles and issues with Lot, after going years without children that were promised to him so that he could be a father of a nation, after all of these things, and finally Abraham is coming to God, and he said, God, is the deal still on? I mean, let's talk, God. How can I become a father? I don't even have a kid. And by the way, my life's been filled with stables. My life has been filled with things that were disappointing. And I've never really been where I expected to be. And I've never kind of done what I expected to do. God, is the deal still on? And after Abraham is looking at the stables of life, God takes him outside and he shows him the stars. The sermon is, what happens when you follow a star and find a stable? With Abraham, God said, you've been in the stable too long. I want you to look at the stars. Listen to me. We cannot connect the dots looking forward, only backward. We cannot connect the stables. We cannot connect the stables looking forward. We can only connect the stables of our life looking backward. So if we cannot connect the stables of our life looking forward, what do we need to do? We need to have the God perspective, as I spoke in the early part of the lesson. We need to see God in every stable. When I had a beautiful friend who literally, his wife was going to deliver a child, their first child. She died, his wife died in childbirth, and the child died too. Lost it all. I spent some time with him. And he looked at me and said, John, here's what I've said to myself 1,000 times. God is too good to be unkind. He's too wise to be confused. If I cannot trace his hand, I can always trust his heart. We all have stables in our life. That's not the question. The question is, do we see God in the stable? On all the campuses, pastors, you can come forward and you can have prayer with each one of the campuses now. But I'd like to pray with you. How many of you would raise your hand and say, John, I've learned something today. What I've learned is that I've got to see God in my stable. And you just raise your hand. I got to see God in the stable. I got to see God in the stable. I've been looking at the stable way too long. I've been looking at the stable, but I haven't been looking for God. God bless you, Todd, Julie.